Hello to you out there, Team Blackstone. Good to see everybody. As you know, I've talked many times about the Council on Foreign Relations. This is a Rothschild think tank. It is not a government agency, but it has vast control over the United States Department of State, the State Department. Today it's run by Biden's guy, Tony Blinken, who is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. There is a nexus, a nasty, dirty deal between the various parties. This is an integral part of what people call the deep state. You've got the bankers and the corporations that they invest in, a lot of multinationals, oil corporations, war industry corporations. They decide we want to go into a certain country. To get into that country, they can do it through the back door using economic hitmen. They can try and buy up politicians, whatever. If those things fail, then you have to start the paramilitary apparatus, the CIA. The Central Intelligence Agency is the enforcement arm of the Council on Foreign Relations. So here's how it works. The bankers, their corporations, they kind of decide what they want, where they want to go, whose resources they want to exploit, which recalcitrant government somewhere in the world that is refusing to give them the rights to what they want. For example, Hugo Chavez and now Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela not wanting to turn over oil back to U.S. oil corporations. So these powers that be up here then say, we're going to use this brilliant academic think tank, all of these, New York liberal scholars and others. It's not unique to a single party. These are people who care about money, greed, wealth, things that transcend political partisanship. They don't care. They'll use Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. So the CFR will write the policies that the United States wants implemented, or that they want implemented by the United States to soften up these governments and open them up. The CFR writes the policies. They give it to the U.S. State Department. And truly, the majority of the State Department bureaucracy is made up of CFR members. There's about 1,000 CFR members. But once the CFR has given the State Department these marching orders, which is what Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called them, then the State Department, led by the Secretary of State, will start trying to implement these things. Everything from economic sanctions on places like Iran or wherever else, to gradually more punitive measures. Then you have the backdoor of the system that goes into play. You've got a Central Intelligence Agency. They are, like I said, the enforcement arm of the CFR. The CFR says what they want. The State Department will try and implement it through U.S. foreign policy, but the CIA will go in and actually start on the ground operations using paramilitaries, mafias, criminal networks, whatever it takes to start trying to achieve their goals. They finance terrorist groups, they arm them, they train them, they give them directions, intelligence support to try and topple a government, for example, trying to take out Assad in Syria, stuff like that. If that doesn't work, then eventually, U.S. policy will start to move toward military intervention into the other country to justify it one way or another. We see with the case of during the Trump administration, there was a whole lot of pro-Israel movement against Israel's enemies, Iran, Yemen because they're supported by Iran, Syria, which is supported by Iran. But as we've moved back into a Democrat administration, they still do the same stuff, though they favor different targets. During the Obama era, we had the targeting of Ukraine, the toppling of Ukraine, and the initiation of troubles in places like Libya and Syria, but a lot in Eastern Europe. Well, now that Biden is in office, this is just Obama 2.0 as far as the globalist effort. And so that's why we see a lot going on right now in the news over in Russia and efforts to Putin's out there trying to flex his muscles and show, hey, we know what this new Biden administration is after, and that is to arm and or support through lots of financial aid to Ukraine, the purchasing of weapons, and preparing to try and take back parts of the Donbass. They probably would never get Crimea back, but you never know, they might try. And so Russia is building up its forces, and there's a lot in the news. And of course, it's evil Russia, evil Russia. Back to that. So the CFR plays a big role in all of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you in this video, this probably take several minutes to read this, but I'm going to share with you the backstory to the CFR. And I hope you enjoy it. It's a little bit dry here or there, but I think you might enjoy it. Before I get started, I would love your support. Go to patreon.com/BlackstoneIntel. You can go to paypal.me/BlackstoneIntel. Or you can go to BlackstoneIntel.com and click the button to my store. You can buy Blackstone caps and shirts and other gear. That'd be awesome. All right. The Council on Foreign Relations. During World War I, President Woodrow Wilson's advisor, Colonel Edward Mandell House, gathered together many wealthy and powerful men to create a plan for the post-war world. Meeting in New York in 1917, they called the gathering the Inquiry and tabled what would become the basis of Wilson's 14 points. Many of the points that Wilson would give to Europe's leaders were surprisingly globalist, including the call for removing all economic barriers between nations and forming a general association of nations. These globalist points were heavily influenced by House, who was an admitted Marxist. When Germany asked for an armistice in 1918, the fighting stopped, and the following year, Wilson ventured to the Paris Peace Conference with many members of the Inquiry in tow, including Mandell House and bankers Paul Warburg and Bernard Baruch. The European leaders agreed to the American peace plan, including the formation of a League of Nations. It was Wilson's finest hour. Unfortunately, it was just that. The League Covenant had to be ratified by the U.S. Congress, which voted against it. There would be no American participation, which doomed the League of Nations. House didn't give up his dream. Meeting in the Majestic Hotel in Paris on May 30th, 1919, with other British and American peace delegates. Their meeting resulted in the creation of an Institute of International Affairs, to be headquartered in the United States and England. The goal of this organization was to promote a one-world government to the people of both nations. The British branch came to be called the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or the RIIF, while the American version was incorporated as the Council on Foreign Relations, the CFR. This took place on July 21st, 1921. This title came from a previous New York dinner club gathering of bankers and attorneys to discuss international trade and finance. The new version of the CFR would be far more secretive, even writing into Article 2 of its bylaws that any person revealing information gleaned from CFR meetings would be excised from membership. The press treated the CFR as a club of East Coast liberal elitists, most of whom lived in New York or Washington, D.C. Membership was by invitation, originally only 1,600 strong, but today estimates put the CFR roster at between 3,000 and 4,000, including leaders in finance, academics, communications, and commerce. In order to be invited for membership, one has to be proposed by a member, seconded by another member, approved by the membership committee, screened, and finally approved by the board of directors. The current council headquarters is a 4-story mansion, the Harold Pratt House on the corner of 68th Street and Park Avenue in New York City, which I believe is actually moved to Washington, D.C., because there is that video of Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, appearing at the nearby CFR headquarters that had recently been moved there. And in her speech, she says, "I'm so glad you moved here. Now we don't have to go so far to get our marching orders," which is a pretty crazy thing if you think about it. The U.S. foreign policy controlled by the State Department saying we're glad that U.S. policy now, we don't have to go so far to get our instructions on what to make as U.S. foreign policy? The media usually portrays the CFR as an open forum. The Council does print its annual report for public consumption, listing all members. The public can subscribe to the CFR publication, Foreign Affairs, as well as surf its website, which explains the group's structure. What the press doesn't report is that about 90% of CFR members also have joined the Bilderberg Group and/or the Trilateral Commission, and a shocking amount of influence all three groups exercise over American government and policy. Despite the kid-glove treatment by the press, the CFR had early political opponents who tried to sound a warning about its intentions. New York Mayor John Hyland said in a March 26, 1922 speech, "The real menace of our republic is the invisible government, which, like a giant octopus, sprawls its slimy length over our city, state, and nation. At the head is a small group of banking houses, generally referred to as international bankers. This little group of international bankers virtually runs our government for their own selfish ends." Back in 1922. Since its inception, the CFR has broadened its membership to include some women and African American leaders and has branched out to a wide number of cities across the United States. Among its original members were Colonel House, John Foster Dulles, Christian Herter. Both of these guys were future secretaries of state. Allen Dulles, who is the brother of John Foster, who served as the director of the CIA while his brother was the head of the State Department. Secretary of State Elihu Root, and newspaper columnist Walter Lippmann. The first CFR president, John W. Davis, was a J.P. Morgan attorney. Actually, not he was the primary attorney for J.P. Morgan. And the first vice president of the CFR, Paul Cravath, also represented Morgan as an attorney. To complete the Morgan influence, one of his business partners, Russell Leffingwell, became the first CFR chairman. So just a few videos ago, I did a story on the Morgans, how J.P. Morgan was just a tool of the Rothschild banking house from London, running operations in the United States. Not surprisingly, Morgan supplied funding for the CFR, along with John D. Rockefeller, Jacob Schiff, Bernard Baruch, and Paul Warburg. These contributors have been replaced in modern times by corporations like Xerox, Texaco, General Motors, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Ford Foundation, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, to name just a few. The CFR over the days, what they want to do is that these individuals want their anonymity. They don't want to be targeted in the way that in the past, the Rothschilds back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, we knew, or the people then knew who the villains were. They put a name, they used the names of these people, these Rothschild members, specifically, and targeted them in media and in the general discussion in society. And so it is to the benefit of people like John D. Rockefeller or Jacob Schiff or these people to hide their activities or to carry out their activities through either corporations or through foundations. Jeff Epstein worked through a lot of foundations, but anyway. The CFR over the decades has produced a stunning list of presidents and presidential candidates, often running against each other, to ensure that a council member would gain the White House. In the 1952 and 56 presidential elections, both Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson had CFR memberships. The same situation occurred in 1960, when CFR members John Kennedy and Richard Nixon vied for office. The 1968 election pitted Nixon against CFR member Hubert Humphrey. 4 years later, Nixon defeated George McGovern, a CFR member. The 1976 election pitted CFR members Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter against each other. The 1980 election saw Carter defeated by Ronald Reagan, who was not a CFR member, but whose running mate, George Bush, was. Even the third-party candidate that year, John Anderson, was with the CFR. In his first term, Reagan's administration featured an incredible 313 CFR members. In 1984, Reagan's challenger was CFR member Walter Mondale. When George Bush finally gained the White House in 1988, he defeated CFR member Michael Dukakis. 4 years later, CFR and Bilderberg Group member Bill Clinton defeated Bush and populated his administration with nearly 100 council members. Clinton gained re-election in 1996 against CFR member Robert Dole. The 2000 election pitted CFR member Al Gore against George W. Bush, who was not a council member, but who staffed his administration with CFR lackeys like Dick Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, Paul Wolfowitz, Lewis Libby, and Colin Powell. Bush defeated CFR member John Kerry in the next election, and in 2008, CFR member John McCain lost to Barack Obama. Although Obama was not a council member, the top levels of his administration are filled with CFR, Bilderberg, and Trilateral Commission members, which will be detailed later. And this book was written back during the Obama administration. Since 1952, only the Lyndon Johnson-Barry Goldwater contest in 1964 featured two candidates who were not CFR members. Shockwaves went through the council when Goldwater defeated Nelson Rockefeller, the CFR candidate, for the Republican Party nomination. Although, I don't know if it'll mention this, but later on, Nelson Rockefeller made it pretty doggone close to the White House, to the presidency. He served as Gerald Ford's vice president. They knocked off Nixon. He wasn't a good guy, but still, they set Nixon up with the help of Henry Kissinger. And before they got Nixon, they got rid of Nixon's. They got rid of Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, on charges. Agnew says that Israel is the one that set him up and took him out. But anyway, so Nixon needed a vice president. He got Gerald Ford, and then. Of course, Nixon ended up out of office not long later, and Ford brought in Nelson Rockefeller as his vice presidential candidate. So, the Rockefellers were one heartbeat away from controlling the U.S. presidency. It is difficult to digest the success the CFR has had in placing one of its members in the nation's highest office. With the exception of Lyndon Johnson, between 1928 and 1981, every American president has been a council member. Johnson more than made up for this by adding 387 CFR members to the upper echelons of his administration. And the CFR has been almost completely successful in getting its members named Secretaries of Defense. Since the National Security Act of 1947 established that post, 14 CFR members have been appointed Secretary of Defense. In addition, since 1940, every Secretary of State except Hillary Clinton and James Burns has been a member of the CFR, or its offshoot, Trilateral Commission. And over the last 8 decades, virtually every high-level U.S. national security and foreign policy advisor has been a council member. In its mission statements, the CFR professes to be a think tank of prominent men who wish to serve the nation with ideas for a better and safer world. A number of researchers claim, however, that it is a secret cabal of powerful men bent on world domination through international business practices, and that these men have manipulated governments and wars for nearly a century. One such accusation came from a former CFR member, Admiral Chester Ward, who was judge advocate during General of the U.S. Navy. According to Ward, the single objective of the CFR is, quote, to bring about the surrender of the sovereignty and national independence of the United States. He went on to claim that the members seek a world banking monopoly over whichever power emerges with control of a global government. Admiral Ward detailed CFR methods in the book he co-authored with Phyllis Schlafly in 1975, Kissinger on the Couch, saying, quote, Once the ruling members of the CFR have decided that the U.S. government should adopt a particular policy, the very substantial research facilities of CFR are put to work to develop arguments, intellectual and emotional, to support the new policy, and to confound and discredit intellectually and emotionally any opposition. Rockefeller family biographer Alvin Moscow went further, quote, "In fact, it is difficult to point to a single major policy in U.S. foreign affairs that has been established since President Wilson, which was diametrically opposed to then current thinking in the Council on Foreign Relations." The noted economist John Kenneth Galbraith resigned from the CFR in 1970, complaining about the dinner meetings where its members were briefed on policy by U.S. government officials. Why should businessmen be briefed by government officials on information not available to the public? Asked Galbraith, especially since it can be financially advantageous. Senator Barry Goldwater, who I have written in for president, which one was it? I think I wrote in Barry Goldwater during the 2004 election because I didn't want Bush or Kerry. But anyway, and of course, Goldwater's dead. Doesn't matter. Dead Barry Goldwater would be 10 times better than George W. Bush or John Kerry. Senator Barry Goldwater was much more vociferous in his disapproval of the CFR and its claim that members strove for a future with less war, less poverty, and more efficient use of the world's resources. Goldwater warned, quote, "This would inevitably be accompanied by a loss in personal freedom of choice and reestablishment of restraints that provoked the American Revolution." Of the regular change in U.S. administrations, Goldwater pointed out, "There has been a great turnover in personnel, but no change in policy. For example, during the Nixon years, Henry Kissinger, a council member, and Nelson Rockefeller, the protege, was in charge of foreign policy. When Jimmy Carter was elected, Kissinger was replaced by Zbigniew Brzezinski, a CFR member, and another David Rockefeller protege." Another senator, Jesse Helms, cautioned. Jesse Helms used to be an anti-globalist senator from here in North Carolina. Very controversial guy. Jesse Helms cautioned, quote, "In the globalist point of view, nation-states and national boundaries do not count for anything. Political philosophies and political principles seem to be simply relative. Indeed, even constitutions are irrelevant to the exercise of power. Liberty and tyranny are viewed as neither necessarily good nor evil, and certainly not a component of policy. All that matters to this club is the maximization of profits resulting from the practice of what can be described as finance capitalism, a system which rests upon the twin pillars of debt and monopoly. This isn't real capitalism. It is the road to economic concentration and to political slavery." That was Jesse Helms. And they mocked him relentlessly, called him a racist and an idiot, and that's why they mobilized against Jesse Helms. Anyway, even the loyal members of the CFR openly admit their globalist plans for ending U.S. sovereignty. In the 50th anniversary of the Council's quarterly publication, Foreign Affairs, then U.S. Ambassador to Great Britain and Yale University President Kingman Brewster wrote this, quote, "Our national purpose should be to abolish American nationality and to take some risks in order to invite others to pool their sovereignty with ours." In the April 1974 issue of that same publication, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Richard Gardner wrote, quote, "An end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned assault." John F. Kennedy relied on CFR member Walt Rostow to advise him on the Vietnam War. Oh, Rostow was terrible. Sorry, I've talked about him, and you know what? I've written a script for an episode on this, but I actually haven't published it yet. Rostow was an avowed believer in ending national sovereignty, which is clearly stated in his book, The United States in the World Arena. In that, he wrote, quote, It is a legitimate American national objective to see removed from all nations, including the United States, the right to use substantial military force to pursue their own interests. Since this right is the root of national sovereignty, it is therefore an American interest to see an end to nationhood, as it has been historically defined. Globalist. Not surprisingly, Rostow's father was a Marxist revolutionary in Russia, and two of his aunts had joined the Communist Party. What a man with Rostow's background was doing in such a high advisory position in the Kennedy White House is mysterious, as he had been rejected by the Eisenhower administration for employment in the State Department and dropped from a contract by the CIA. Apparently, Rostow's CFR connections were sufficient to get Kennedy to fire his State Department head of security, Otto Otepka, in order to hire him. Rostow's blueprint for the peace race, calling for the replacement of all national armies by a UN military force, is available online today in Department of State Publication 7277. After being unavailable for decades due to its sensitive nature. Bowing to Rostow's suggestion of a unilateral American disarmament, Kennedy, in 1961, signed Public Law No. 87-297, calling for the elimination of U.S. national forces and further declaring that, quote, no one may possess a firearm or lethal weapon except police or military personnel. During the following administrations, this law has been updated 18 times and is still active and, quote, in transition, according to ex-President George W. Bush and Admiral William Crowe. Its companion document, Publication 7277, released in 1962, describes a two-phase operation reducing the U.S. armed forces to 2.1 million, while those of China and the Soviet Union do the same. One half of our armed forces were to be merged with China's and Russia's. The second phase required the remaining half of our forces to be placed under the command of the United Nations Security Council and, by agreement, would always be headed by a Russian. The world's smaller nations were to put all of their armed forces under the same UN umbrella, achieving a situation in which, quote, no state or nation would have the military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. Congress still appropriates funds to support this program, even though it is clear its final passage would give policing powers in America to foreign troops. The Council on Foreign Relations makes policies like these more palatable to the public through an intricate process of studies published by various think tanks, often tax-funded. Sociologist Hadley Cantrell, a respected public opinion researcher during and after the 1940s, wrote in his book, The Human Dimension, quote, psychopolitical operations are propaganda campaigns designed to create perpetual tensions and to manipulate different groups of people to accept the particular climate of opinion the CFR seeks to achieve in the world. Among the CFR-associated tax-funded think tanks is the Tavistock Foundation, which runs a $6 billion per year operation in the United States. Under its direct control are 10 major institutions containing about 400 subsidiaries and 3,000 other study groups and think tanks that initiate programs intended to control public opinion. John Coleman, in Conspirators' Hierarchy, flatly states, quote, Tavistock and like-minded American foundations have a single goal in mind: to break down the psychological strength of the individual and render him helpless to oppose the dictators of the New World Order. Tavistock originated in London as the Institute of Human Relations in 1921, when the Marquis of Tavistock donated a building to the organization to study the effects of shell shock on British soldiers after World War I. Its purpose, according to retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Byron Weeks, quote, was to establish the breaking point of men under stress under the direction of the British Army Bureau of Psychological Warfare. Tavistock opened its doors in America, armed with a variety of psychological gambits designed to shape public opinion. Quote, "This opinion is formulated by the dominant council and foreign relations members," wrote author and Florida State Emeritus Professor of Political Science Thomas Dye. He continues, "This opinion is formulated by the dominant council and foreign relation members who belong to an inner circle called the special group that plan and coordinate the psycho-political operations used to manipulate the American public, and through a vast governmental undercover infrastructure called the secret team that include the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of government, such as Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Director of the CIA. Those who control television, radio, and newspaper corporations, who head the largest law firms, who run the largest and most prestigious universities and think tanks, who direct the largest private foundations, and who direct the largest public corporations. Tax-free foundations are the preferred CFR means of funding favorable policy-making processes, and Dye claimed that nearly 40% of all foundation assets come under the aegis of just 10 or 11 CFR-controlled foundations. The RAND National Defense Research Institute is an exception, as it is federally funded, but its executive vice president is CFR member Michael Rich, who has held that second highest position in the organization since 1993. One of the key tasks that RAND handles, aside from national security and population control, concerns studying strategies to manipulate and misinform large segments of a population. Dye points out that by remaining hidden from the other CFR members, the secret team and the special group protect themselves from possible prosecution. These elite members only need to deny participating in any operation which is identical to the operation of the Bilderberg Group. A case when this system didn't work was the Iran-Contra affair, in which the CFR special group within the Reagan administration urged the president to disregard the arms embargo on Iran, selling that nation munitions and using the money to fund the anti-Marxist Contra guerrillas in Nicaragua. This special group included CFR members George H.W. Bush, Donald Reagan, Elliott Abrams, who helped out throughout the Trump administration to try and overthrow Venezuela, John Poindexter, Caspar Weinberger, William Casey, Robert Gates of the CIA, and Robert McFarlane. When news of the scheme leaked out, a scandal ensued, and the members of the special group faced charges. But 6 years later, when Bush was finishing his term of office, he pardoned Weinberger, McFarlane, Elliott Abrams, and 3 CIA chiefs. And so the craziness continues. Elements of the CIA have been a willing tool for the CFR over the decades. The marriage between the CFR and the CIA, many of whose top-level administrators were or are council members, was obvious as early as a 1968 discussion group in which CIA Director of Plans Richard Bissell called for more discretion during the interplay between the agency, the CIA, and the CFR. Addressing situations in which CFR dominated corporations act as covers for CIA operations, Bissell said this, quote, "If the agency is to be effective, it will have to make use of private institutions on an expanding scale, though those relations which have been blown cannot be resurrected. We need to operate under deeper cover, with increased attention to the use of intermediaries. The CIA's interface with the rest of the world needs to be better protected." The intelligence game understandably requires seemingly innocent business covers to achieve goals. Every major intelligence outfit in the world uses the same system, but the interrelationship between an enormous secret spy organization that has repeatedly toppled governments and instigated wars, and a collection of power brokers who wish to see American sovereignty and its Constitution destroyed is deeply disturbing. The CFR is embedded in our government's highest cabinet positions today. Like I said, current Secretary of State Tony Blinken, CFR. Biden administration is brimming with CFR members just like all previous administrations. Holding these positions allows CFR members to control the government entities that protect the oligarchs' property and investments worldwide. When an appointee takes office, he generally hires other CFR members to join his staff. Witness the career of Henry Kissinger. In 1955, he was just another academic who attended a meeting hosted by Nelson Rockefeller, one of President Eisenhower's foreign affairs assistants at that time. A friendship blossomed between the two, which led to Kissinger being brought into the fold with David Rockefeller and other CFR members. These connections provided funds that allowed Kissinger to work with officials of the State Department, the CIA, the Atomic Energy Commission, and all three military branches. His access to them led to his best-selling book, Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy, which stated his opinion that a nuclear war could be winnable. When Kissinger joined the Nixon administration as Secretary of State, it followed a presidential campaign between Nixon and Hubert Humphrey that was rendered absolutely meaningless, according to Gary Allen in his momentous best-selling book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Allen stated, quote, "There really was not a dime's worth of difference. Voters were given the choice between CFR World Government Advocate Nixon and CFR World Government Advocate Humphrey. Only the rhetoric was changed to fool the public." And by the way, if you are still listening here at roughly 35 minutes in, if you'd like a free copy of None Dare Call It Conspiracy, if you don't mind reading an ebook, I've put it up on my website for you. You can go to blackstoneintel.com. On the if you're on your phone, select the menu, go to where it says free ebooks, and I think it's the second one down. None Dare Call It Conspiracy. You can download it to your phone and read it, or read it on your computer. Great book. The influx of CFR members in high government positions has remained high with each successive administration. The Clinton administration contained nearly 100 CFR members, according to published reports, including ambassadorships to Great Britain, Australia, Russia, France, Italy, India, South Africa, Chile, Spain, Syria, Poland, and the Philippines. To protect against scrutiny into the awesome influence it has on national policy, the CFR created an offshoot organization, the Trilateral Commission. And if you'd like me to share information from this book on the Trilateral Commission in another video, write it down in the comment section. Let me know that's something you'd be interested in, and I'd be glad to share it with you and tell you some of my thoughts on the Trilateral Commission. That's it for this episode. Thank you for watching. I would appreciate, again, your support makes this work financially viable. PayPal.me/BlackstoneIntel. Patreon.com/BlackstoneIntel. If you go to Patreon and sign up at the $5 per month or more level, that makes you a Blackstone Insider, and you get access to video content that you won't get here publicly, including this new series that I'm starting, talking about serial killers and their backstories, a little thing that I'm trying out to see if there's some interest out there. That's it for now. Let's stay united, fight against the CFR. And pay attention in the news. Realize that what's going on out of the U.S. State Department comes from the Council on Foreign Relations, which comes from the people who control the Council on Foreign Relations. And so for those of us who are crazy conspiracy theorists, there's something to it. There's something to a lot of these. There's a reason that these conspiracies about a deep state and globalists and all this New World Order, there's a reason for it, and it's not new. This has been around for over 100 years now. These things, concerns, going back to Woodrow Wilson, and there's trouble long before that, but significant control over the U.S. government really took place during Wilson's time, and it's only gotten worse ever since. So don't let anyone tell you that you're crazy or that this is all in your head. It's well documented. people do have trouble understanding it and will take it too far and become paranoid and think that every little glitch on their computer or phone or anytime they post something and they don't get likes and it's the deep state after me. You take it with a grain of salt, right? Don't go overboard. But there is some legitimacy to the idea of a vast bureaucracy, a shadow government, the people who run this deep state behind the scenes that basically is in control of the U.S. government. There's truth to it. Anyway, thank you for watching. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.